Welcome back. And of course, right after AM Business, we zoom into a crucial matter. It has to do with the graphic business Stanbic Bank breakfast meeting. Now, the theme for the last quarter, this one happening today, 17 times too many. What should we stop doing and start doing as a people? It's a lot to think about. Well, the speakers this morning are Professor Godfred Alufa Bokpin, lecturer, University of Ghana Business School. There's also Kwame Riafe, who is a managing director with Wilmer Ghana. They have converged at the Labadi Beach Hotel, where this is actually happening currently. We bring you the live feed.
Is on the table. You guessed right, we are discussing the IMF. Ghana is in a critical economic situation. We had to turn to our big brother for help. And this is just coming after perhaps a couple of years ago when the finance minister said he vowed we're never going to go to the IMF for support, but we had to. And this is where we are right now. The 17th time we are going to the IMF for support. And so the question on the table this morning, 17 times too many. What should we stop doing and what should we start doing? That's the topic for this morning. Joining me with a look ahead to the discussion, we start at the top of the hour, is Eric Amposa-Boateng, who has been on this with me for so many times. We've been here discussing issues ahead of the graphic business Stanbic breakfast meeting. Eric Amposa-Boateng, tax analyst. We also have with us this morning Apostle Benjamin Mensah, who is CEO of Benergy Ghana Limited. Grateful you could join us this morning. And so I'm going to start right at it. The IMF seems right now as if it's a disease, because we are always turning to the IMF for support, even when we have said we are not going to go back to the IMF. I mean, there are so many things that have happened over the years. We have had to deal with a pandemic. We've had to deal with a war in Ukraine, and it's put economies on edge. There's a global financial crisis right now. And so I want to first start off with what appears to be a disease, Mr. Amposa. Why is it that we don't seem to, we can't win ourselves off the IMF in the first place, 17 times running?
Thank you very much, and good morning to your viewers and listeners. I think that we are not doing the right things, because in my opinion, if we've gone to the IMF for 17 times, the question is that what have we learned? What were we doing right? What were we doing wrong that made us get there? And so if you've gone to the IMF for 17 times, I think that you should be able to ask yourself why you always have to go back. And I believe that is why we are here. There's something that we are not doing right as a nation. And personally, I think that even after this one, the 18th one, we are likely to go back. We are likely to go back unless we change the way we think, our attitude to work, how we spend our money, revenue that we can mobilize, to the extent that the revenue that we can mobilize internally, we can even triple the amount. Yes, I believe so. So a few months ago, I said this, I think, on one of your platforms, that in my opinion, there was no need for us to go to the IMF. Yes, we've had a pandemic. It's global. In Germany, it is there. I think even in France, 2 weeks ago, there were some protests. But you realize that the decisions that have been taken by the managers of those economies have actually mitigated whatever that they are going through, and it's working for them. I can give an example. In Germany, government is saying that pack your vehicles and go by the public transport, either the rail or the bus. And it's working for them because they have an excellent way regarding their means of transport and all that. And government has even gone further to reduce the tickets that you buy for a month You know, if you buy 6 months, you pay much less than somebody who probably buys for a month. And we can learn from them. So I ask myself, what are we doing that we are not doing well?
You say we had an alternative not to go to the IMF.
Yes, in my opinion.
But some would disagree with you looking at the crisis we're in, especially with our debt. I'll come to you on that, on what you think should have been the alternative. But I want to come to you, Mr. Mensah. What are we not doing right?
Thank you for the opportunity to share my thoughts and opinions on what we are going through. As an accountant and also a tax expert and an auditor, we don't put our books together well. Government brings a budget. The budget shows excessive spending, and nobody is checking them. Mm-hmm. Every time they read the budget, they will come and cry. There's a revenue that is not coming in. We couldn't meet our targets. So why are you not meeting your target when it comes to revenue mobilization? And if you hit on that point, that look, I need to go back to the drawing board. How am I mobilizing revenue? And revenue mobilization by government is taxation. And our tax system is so porous. You don't know what is what. But thank God for the Ghana card. It is an important card that can, and you have an idea who is in the system, who is working, who is doing what. You understand? So I, for one, said, look, going to the IMF, we have no alternative because we want policy credibility. We want the market to start looking at us again, even though we have gone with 104% over GDP in our borrowing. Mm-hmm. We want the creditors out there to say, look, we are still in to do the right things. So now you have the boogeyman in town, the IMF, who's going to discipline you. But after they leave, what are you going to do with the discipline that you have brought onto yourself? Critical
question. After they leave, what are we going to do? And that's where we always fail.
Yes.
But I want to bring up the point, and just to be fair, I mean, the finance minister had filed that we're not going to go to the IMF for a program. And when he said that, our economy seemed to be doing well at that point. And then the pandemic struck, and then we had the war in Ukraine. I want to come to you, Mr. Amponsa. I mean, the government always says the situation we are in is because of the external factors, some of these unforeseen circumstances. Is that enough excuse to explain why we have to go to the IMF for support?
Well, to an extent, I think that the situation that we find ourselves in is as a result of some external factors, but probably to an extent. Mm-hmm. And so I don't think that we can lay the issue solely on those external factors. My reason is simple. Countries around us or everywhere in the world, they've all gone through that. But some of them have even taken advantage of that and have been able to strengthen their economies by creating jobs and all that. You know that when we had the pandemic in Ghana, last week I was listening to a story on one of your networks. There was a lady who has completed university, and when we had the COVID, she started sewing nose masks, the sanitizers. Now she's been able to develop or manufacture her own sanitizer, and she's making money. People started working from home, and that is where I even found out that most top firms are now working or advising their employees to work from home, and therefore giving away those premises that they have rented. So what it means is, yes, you may have the pandemic, but there's always...
So your point being that the pandemic created some more opportunities for us to expand our business and promote
the economy,
the economy. And so I agree with you on the point that, and with what others have said, that the problem is the structure of our economy. Right now, we import so much. We've seen what is happening to the city right now.
Yes.
And so where do we begin from, Mr. Mensah, in restructuring our economy so that we don't have to head back to the IMF? Because it's just for a period. And once they get off, like you pointed out, we come back to the same situation. We have to fix the fundamental problem.
We have been talking about adding value to resources that we get from Ghana. We have been talking about it for over 60 years. 60 years. It is recently that we are building gold refineries in Ghana. It doesn't make sense.
We have just one.
It doesn't make sense. So let's go back to the drawing board. Everybody, the structure, the structure. You have spoken about the structure. What are you doing about it?
Why is it difficult to implement the ideas? I mean, because if you talk to the policymakers, they seem to know what the issue is, but then when it comes to implementation, we seem to struggle.
Because we are so divisive. You know, we don't know how to come together as a nation. We are a very young nation. When NDC is in power, they push away the MPP's ideas. When the MPP is in power, they push away the NDC's ideas. You understand? Until we decide that. Let me give you an example. In the US, for example, they have something called Office of Management and Budget. It is a non-partisan department of the federal government, whereby when you bring your budget, they will scrutinize it. They will look at the numbers. Me, I'm an accountant. The numbers are very important to me. They will look at the numbers and they can tell you, if you say you are going to spend this amount of money, where are you going to get the revenue to spend? So they checkmate them. So now you have every time the finance will go and present a budget, and nobody scrutinizes it. They do the committees. I don't want to even go there, and we are still in the mess. We said we enacted the law was 5%, but we go beyond the 5% of deficit. So there's something we are very learned, smart people in the system, but we've decided not to operate our brains, and we always keep running to the advanced countries for help. You have a budget whereby about 50-20% is you want free money from the West. They are also struggling. They won't give you that money. So we need to create a better homegrown solutions to our problems.
But do you get the indication the government has such a plan? I mean, all we are being told is that we need the IMF to fix the economy. People's expectations are up. I mean, I think a couple of days ago we discussed on radio, I mean, we need to manage the expectations of people, because people seem to think that when the IMF comes, then all our problems are solved.
No.
But then the point, Mr. Boateng.
Yes, sir.
The government, do you think the government has a plan? Maybe I should ask you that question straightforward. I mean, during these times where we try to manage a crisis, do you think that the government has a plan to bring us where we ought to be and not to return to the IMF?
Well, I think that lies in the bosom of the vice president, or let me say the finance minister, to a big extent the team, economic management team. You see, we are not doing things right. For example, let me pick one item: rice, and probably imported chicken. If we decide to consume the local rice, and we also decide to promote the poultry industry in Ghana, government giving them incentives. Look, right now, do you know how much it takes to import day-old chickens into the country? The feed, the maize. These are little things that are beginning. I think that if you begin to do them, it may take a while, but eventually the economy is going to expand, because if you are helping the poultry sector, and this is just one example that I'm giving, it is going to create jobs. Okay, the income that are going to make, you are going to get the PAYE if you have employees. At the end of the day, the corporate tax. Let's even look at the crude oil. Okay, all that we get in Ghana now is the royalties. Okay, and for the corporate tax we get zero, because the expenditure is huge. The equipment, the capital allowances that they will grant. But at the end of the day, you compute the tax and it is nil. Okay, so meanwhile, we claim that we have the Tama oil refinery. I tried to find out, and the feedback that I got was that if we decide to refine the oil here in Ghana, at the end of the day, the price will be more than what we even import. That is what they are saying. I don't know if we can probably discuss that. And so, if that is what they are saying, my question to them is that, what are the other nations or countries that are refining the oil, which we buy from them? Can't we learn from them? Can't we also bring them in to help us, even if we need to invest, bring in investors to set up our own oil refinery? And we are not doing all that. And so what happens now, we're just talking about before, price of fuel. Every week there's an increase.
Yeah. I'm told I have 2 minutes, so I just want to ask this final question so we wrap up. We still have a huge appetite for borrowing. We are not making enough revenue. Do you think we are going to go for an 18th program after the 17th one? 15 seconds, maybe?
Yeah, we will.
That's your prediction?
We will, definitely. Trust me, we will.
This is what I'm saying.
We are not putting things together right. We are not even communicating to the masses. The negotiation going on is like a mystery. We need to give daily update to the citizens. Look,
15 seconds. Are we going to go for an 18th program?
I think that we can go back to them or not, depending on what we are going to do with the money that we are going to get. Okay, if we are going to invest the money in sectors of the economy that will lead to expansion, that will create jobs, that will create employment, and we begin to consume what we produce locally. And then more importantly, look at the tax exemptions. It is something that is so close or so dear to my heart, because the exemptions that we give to these multinational companies, they are huge. And at the end of the day, they repatriate all the money in what? In foreign currency. And that is why the city will continue to depreciate and will always be worse off.
Okay.
And at the end of the day, we'd have to go back to them.
All right, we would have to end it here. Thank you so much, Eric Amponsah-Boateng, tax analyst. Also, Apostle Benjamin Mensah, CEO, Benergy Ghana Limited. Interesting conversation we've had. So let's deal with the 17th one, shall we? 17 times too many. What should we stop doing, and what should we start doing as a people? That is the topic for discussion this morning at the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank breakfast meeting, which is just about kicking off. I'm handing you over to my colleague, Winston Amwa.
Thank you very much, Darrell Kwal, and welcome to the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank breakfast meeting. Well, it's the final one for 2022, and the theme is very instructive. 17 times too many. What should we stop doing and start doing as a people? What should we stop doing and start doing as a people? In 2019, when we celebrated the exit from an IMF program, for many Ghanaians, that was supposed to be the last. Well, it has not been the last, even though we're very proud to have gotten into an IMF program. The question is, what have we not been doing right? And what must we start doing right if we would ever not go back to the IMF? And that's why this conversation is very important. Because yes, we are preparing for the 2023 budget. Yes, we're asking ourselves all the questions. Do we have an agreement with the IMF? All things being equal, when can we get that agreement? What even becomes of the Ghanaian economy, we've asked ourselves. Because for now, when you're told of all the raft of measures that we are putting in place, it ends with when we get the IMF program. And that's why, for me, this program is very, very important at this time. My name is Winston Amwa, and I'll be in charge of this ceremony. We are live on the Joy News channel and also live on Joy 99.7 FM. We'll commence the program with an opening prayer by Yvonne Ayi of the Graphic Communications Group. Let's welcome her.
Shall we pray? Heavenly Father, we come to you this morning asking for your wisdom, support, and understanding to begin this meeting. Help us to engage in a meaningful discussion, and we ask for your grace to sail through the rest of the year successfully. These and many other things we ask through your Son, Jesus Christ, our Lord. Amen.
Thank you very much, Yvonne, for that short prayer. We'll continue with a welcome address by the acting editor of Graphic Business, Charles Benoni-Okang. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Madam Chair, board members of Graphic, my MD and executives of Graphic, distinguished panelists, our cherished participants, ladies and gentlemen. In his last fellow Ghanaian speech, to the nation, our President, Nana Addo Dankwa Akufo-Addo, admitted to the deep economic crisis bedeviling our dear economy. He identified some of the causes of the unprecedented challenges to the outbreak of COVID-19 and the raging Russian-Ukraine war. Consequently, he asked us to rally behind the government to help turn the economy around and restore it to its former glory. The call has received mixed reactions, but we cannot fault the divergent positions the people hold about this call. However, Madam Chair, we at Graphic Business welcome the call in view of the fact that the situation in which we find ourselves cannot be left to the government alone, but cannot be left to the government alone to solve, while we fold our hands and watch. Currently, we know inflation is at 37.2%, the highest in more than 2 decades, with the rate expected to go high again in October. The trend is an indication that we are likely to miss the revised target of about 28% at the end of the year. Aside that, we have witnessed a fast depreciating local currency with lending rates hovering at an average of about 33%. Fuel prices since January this year to date have risen to more than 160%, pushing transport fares up almost every quarter since the beginning of the year. The World Bank, in the Africa Pulse report released in October, projected that Ghana would end the year with a debt-to-GDP ratio of about 104%. Madam Chair, these and many other economic indicators which have taken a nosedive are really scary, and we must all be concerned about it. Presently, we are in talks with the International Monetary Fund for a bailout meant to, among other things, restore investor confidence in our badly bruised economy. We have witnessed discussions during the week and the week past, with experts sharing their views and ideas on how our economy can recover, and we are also doing the same today. We are also aware of the many engagements the government had with stakeholders in the last couple of weeks, but we are yet to see any concrete program or policies to turn our situation around. In view of the fragmented nature of the discussions, we at Graphic Business join calls for a national economic dialogue where people from academia, the clergy, CSOs, among others, will converge to discuss how to get out of this present situation, and most importantly, chart a new path that will never get us back to the Bretton Woods for support. Meanwhile, as we wait for that to happen, we expect today's Graphic Business Stanbic Breakfast meeting to provide key suggestions, as usual, to guide the government as it drafts the 2023 budget. On the theme, 17 times too many, what should we stop doing and start doing as a people? Our panelists will touch on 3 perspectives: the challenge, what is, has been, and why; alternative homegrown solutions, options, and requirements; and the third, what Ghana must do differently. With these few words, I wish, on behalf of the board, management, and staff of Graphic, and my team at Graphic Business, to welcome you all to this August event. I wish, Madam Chair, that I will not be going ahead of myself if I wish all of us a Merry Christmas in advance. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Charles Ben Oniokine. I am not so sure about the Merry Christmas bit. We're still in November, and a lot of Ghanaians are concerned about Christmas. You've talked about inflation, and you've asked the question whether we can meet the revised target of plus or minus 28. You're currently at 37. In October, you saw the depreciation of the Ghana cedi. In October, you saw transport fares being increased. For the whole of 2022, transport fares have been increased by 60%. And so if what you saw in September is anything to go by following the increase in fuel prices again and increase in utility tariffs and, all the increases we saw in food prices, then the projection by some experts that we may end October with 40% could actually be right. 40% rate of inflation. Anyway, let's continue with the conversation. And this is the Graphic Business Stanbic Bank Breakfast Meeting. So we'd invite the CEO of Stanbic Bank, Kwamina Asumeni, to give us some brief remarks. Okay, before we get to Kwamina, would start with Ato Afo, who's MD of Graphic Communications Group. Let's welcome him with a round of applause.
Nearly 3 decades ago, getting out of college, writing what they used to call the long essay, as a fourth-year humanities student, I did a paper on an African-American writer called James Baldwin. Baldwin makes a note that talent is insignificant. I know a lot of talented ruins. Beyond talent lie all the usual words: discipline, love, luck, but most of all, endurance. James Baldwin. 17 times too many. What should we stop doing and start doing as a people? There are 2 content items there for me as a language student. Stop doing and people. The chairman, management of Stanbic Bank Ghana, board members of the Graphic Communications Group Limited, our expert panelists, ladies, gentlemen, and our audience member networks across our digital and media partner networks. It is always a privilege to welcome and share a comment with you at our breakfast meeting, made possible by Graphic Business and enabled by Stanbic Bank Ghana. My cue is very simple. We need to have hope as a people, and when we do have hope, we'll be encouraged to do more. We'll become courageous. So having hope will give us courage. 2, we need to endeavor daily to bridge the disconnect between what we know we should do and what we actually do. We have some incredible people amongst us working all over the globe. Ghanaians do amazing things. I don't have any doubt that we can do more. Therefore, it is time to change the story. Taking together the interrelated crisis of high food and commodity prices, currency fluctuations, climate, nature, the Russo-Ukraine impasse, poverty, debt, and even inflation contain a way forward for our local communities and an economy enduring significant challenges. 3, although we may not see it clearly yet, they also point to a different pathway for growth and renewal. We know that economic and financial systems prioritize market-based values of nature, such as food and energy, production, and security, that are fundamental to our collective well-being. We also know that we also know what we need to do to address this and move toward a Ghanaian economy based on sustainable management of our societal commons. Delivering this local environment positive economy requires consistent political vision and a tough and enduring leadership. I note that disagreements are fine, but disrespect is not. Our chairman, I will briefly touch on one strategic pillar and cede the ground to our panel of specialists who are herein gathered: food security and agriculture. Food security and agriculture. Agriculture broadly and agri-processing specifically can act as a lever to assist in stimulating the rest of the economies because it creates demand for fixed good, public goods, road networks, infrastructure, such as storage facilities, processing plants, harbors, even airports. Agriculture can act as a catalyst to stimulate investment in these sectors, which will trigger other sectors in our various communities. At the individual level and in our working group or cooperative level, beneficiaries of a strategically targeted intervention program, consistently applied and reviewed for efficiency, have the direct benefit of being able to support themselves, feed their families, collaborate with others, and provide education for their children. My view is, and it is invariably proven, when people are fed and are kept busy, the noise will be filtered out. We need a lifestyle change backed by real commitment and an endurance to stick to a plan that delivers this mandate. So my charge to all of us here at home, around the world, those of us who love Ghana and believe in this country, let's collectively commit and go confidently in the direction of our dreams by working towards and living the lives we've imagined, not what other economies sadly dictate or determine. We need practical, viable and visible solutions to forge a new narrative of hope. And we'll do this by doing. We continuously also need to be minded that our lives is an ongoing process of creation, doing. We are creating our reality every moment. Distinguished Chairman, the representative of the Chief Executive of Stanbic Bank, board members of the Graphic Communications Group, our audience member networks across our digital and media partners, ladies and gentlemen, I welcome you. Thank you.
Thank you very, very much, MD of Graphic Communications Group Limited, for welcoming all of us again and those brief remarks. So we're getting into it very soon. We'll get into the conversation itself. What should we stop doing and start doing as a people? Because we say 17 times, too many, 17 times going to the IMF, an indication that we always run for help in managing our economy. And the chairperson for today's occasion has a PhD in economics from the University of Nottingham, and her specialization includes labor markets, economic of scale, development and education, applied microeconometrics, poverty and inequality and development economics, and is also a senior lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Ghana. Ladies and gentlemen, let's welcome Dr. Priscilla Twumasi Bafo, who's our chairperson for today's occasion.
The Managing Director of Graphic Communications Group, the Chief Executive of Stanbic Bank, board members of Graphic Communications Group and Stanbic Bank, distinguished panelists, expert participants, ladies and gentlemen, good morning. Good morning. It is an honor to have been called to chair this session, and I take the opportunity to thank the organizers of this morning's program with the theme 17 times too many. What should we stop doing and start doing as a people? I thank you for your confidence in me to share this occasion, and I take the responsibility with humility. I believe the team behind today's program could not have picked a better theme. It is appropriate, it is suitable at a time where the nation is hopeful in securing yet another IMF deal for the 17th time since independence. Why? Because we know the ramifications if we do not in our national economy at this point in time. But let me digress a bit. In April 2019, when Ghana exited the extended credit facility under the IMF, I wrote an article on the conversation, and the title was "Why Ghana is Likely to Go Back to the Fund, No Matter How Apprehensive Leaders Feel About the Relationship." At the time, it felt like I was being too skeptical, but here we are again today, eagerly knocking on the doors of the fund for yet another fund-assisted program. So I am not surprised, and I know a lot of people are equally not surprised, because when you look at the data since independence, the nation's appeal for IMF-assisted program has been in a cycle of 4 years. What is surprising, however, is the sentiments expressed by leaders whenever the country exits an IMF program. And here I walk you through a sample of some of the sentiments. The decision to be independent of IMF budgetary support is a watershed in the history of Ghana's economic development. We will not go back to the IMF again. Ghana will no longer be troubled by conditionalities of the IMF. And lastly, Ghana became a respected IMF member again as it exits ECF program. These and many comments encapsulate how Ghanaians feel about the relationship with the fund. Yet, here we are once again, for the 17th time, seeking another IMF program. So on a lighter note, I ask, for the 17th time, if this was a marital relationship, I am sure by 17 years, each partner would have found his or her level in the relationship. So back to the theme, 17 times too many. What should we stop doing and start doing as a people? Logically, the question to ask is, do we know what to do as a people? Of course we do. And like the MD of Graphic Business mentioned, Ghanaians have been to top universities all over the world. And indeed, we excel because Ghanaians have a reputation of being very intelligent and exceptional in whatever they do, probably globally, but in our public service, maybe we need to ask ourselves a number of questions. So it is evident, and our excellent performance is also quite evident in the way we are able to turn the fortunes of the economy around whenever we are under an IMF program. So why have we not done what needs to be done over the years so that we do not repeat the cycle? Specifically, why have we not built resilience in the economy through an aggressive import substitution industrialization drive? Because we know that is the right thing to do. Why do we not generate enough revenue domestically? And more importantly, why don't we cut down on expenditure while ensuring efficiency in the usage of public funds? I believe the issue goes beyond economic theory. The challenge is the intersection, really, between economics and politics. Leaders know the right things to do, but do they have the political will to do them? For instance, we all agree that our over-reliance on imports in this country is a problem. Yet, some years ago, there was a ban on the importation of poultry when it was established that we had the local capacity to produce. What happened to the policy? Now, imports have become so embedded in this country that we change our hard-earned cedi for the almighty dollar to import everything, including cow feet, intestines of animals, and even chicken back. It is sometimes shocking to look at the kinds of things that we use our hard-earned currency to import. Although it is important to appeal to Ghanaians of the need to patronize made in Ghana goods and build local industries because it is the way to go, I believe the buck stops with leadership. Why do I say so? Economic agents respond to incentives. In policy, if policy are used to restrict non-essential imports, while at the same time promoting local production at competitive prices, people would respond by moving into production instead of importation to create jobs, ease pressure on the currency, and generate growth and development for all. So more importantly, I ask again, are leaders committed to going the long haul? Are leaders committed to investing for long-term outputs when they are faced with short-term options in our election cycle? Probably this will be a topic for another discussion. So in concluding, what will the IMF program for the 17th time offer to the country? One, it will give us a balance of payment support through the influx of the much-needed foreign currency, as we desperately need based on the performance of the cedi currently. It will help build investor confidence. And why do we need investor confidence? Because we know that in recent times, issuance of euro bonds on international markets is a significant way in shoring up our currency and keeping it stable. As it stands, based on worst performance of economic indicators, Ghana has basically been shut out of the international market due to estimated high debt levels. It was estimated that our debt to GDP would be about 84% at the end of 2022. The fund would also come with opportunities, for example, for concessionary loans with other bilateral and multilateral agencies, which are important in keeping our BOP position stable. So, ladies and gentlemen, as the team of expert panelists begin deliberations on the topic, it is my hope that we will have a dispassionate session and that the communique that would arise out of this would be useful in making a significant contribution towards our national discourse for economic development and indeed emancipation economically, as some people put it, so that in the next 4 years we do not converge here again discussing the 18th time. I thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very, very much, Dr. Priscilla Chumesi-Bafo. Thank you very much for accepting to chair the occasion. And I like the questions you've been asking. I mean, you've identified the problem. You've talked about what it would take us to solve this problem. And you've asked whether we are prepared, whether we are willing. to do that? Would leadership be willing to do that? While you say that could be a topic for another day, I say that will be a topic for today. Because yes, we will talk about everything. I am told to talk about, the challenge, what it is, has been, and why. Alternative homegrown solutions, options, and requirements, and what Ghana must do differently. That's where leadership comes in. What Ghana must do differently. And are we prepared to do that? Can we do that? Bearing in mind that in this country, a lot of things are influenced by the politics of it. Are we prepared to do the right things even as we get very close to election 2024? Once again, thank you very, very much. So we're getting into the conversation now. And this morning, we're privileged to be joined by Professor of Finance at the University of Ghana Business School, Professor Godfrey Bobking. Kindly welcome with a round of applause as he takes his seat. We also have a representative from the Association of Ghana Industries. Yes, we're talking about alternative solutions, homegrown policies. Chonam Akpelu, please welcome him with a round of applause. And as we focus on what we must do differently, we have a man who served as the IMF country representative to the Republic of Djibouti and former chairman of Stanchart, Dr. Emmanuel Otinkuma. Okay, Dr. Kuma says he would, tell us a thing or two later on when we get into the conversation. So let me start off with you, Professor Bobing. Yes, we know this is the 17th time we're going to the IMF. In 2019, when we exited the program, we said we're not going to go back. In fact, we celebrated that with a party. We're all happy as a country. Even at the beginning of this year, we said we're not going to go back to the IMF. We asked the question, why were people always pushing Ghana to go to the IMF? Resorting to the scriptures, we said we're a proud nation and we knew how to turn the economy around. Of course, the president had told all of us in 2020, in the heat of COVID-19, how we knew how to turn the economy around, but did not know how to bring back lives that were going to be lost. After COVID-19, we said, even under COVID-19, we're able to grow at 0.9% where others were growing in the negatives. And we said in 2021 that we grew about 5%. It was an indication that we were doing well. And that but for Russia or Ukraine, Russia's invasion of Ukraine, we wouldn't be where we are today. This morning, you are the experts. Tell us, what is it that we haven't been doing right? What did we do wrong that we find ourselves here in the same position?
Okay, thank you very much. Good morning, everyone. I stand on the existing protocols, and I don't want to say it's exciting when we have to talk about Ghana IMF, but it appears it's a running word now in the country. And thank you so much, Dr. Priscilla Chumesi, for the introduction. It appears we're looking at it from the same angle. So if I take some of your statement, forgive me, I acknowledge in advance. Thank you very much. Well, I put it this way. Ghana's impending 17th IMF-supported program, for me, is not surprising. But what is rather surprising to me is that we made the call a bit too late. That we were going to go wasn't surprising. That we made the call a bit too late was a bit surprising. And the reason I say so is that the optimal time for Ghana to have made a call for a fund-supported program was actually in 2021. The last quarter of 2021, Ghana had met all the requirements to check in at the IMF Rehabilitation Center.
What were those requirements that we met?
I will talk about them briefly. For a number of low-income developing countries, it looks as though going to the IMF is a football league, perhaps more competitive than the English Premier League or the Spanish La Liga. Please forgive me if I put it this way. As we speak, Liberia is currently a record holder in terms of the number of times they've been to the fund, 24 times. And Ghana looks set to win her 17th title. The reason we have been there that often, you can trace it back to our first application we made to the fund in 1965 under the watch of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah. What was the term sheet? If you examine the literature, you will find that the reasons Ghana cited for the 1965 aborted IMF program, I'm saying aborted because Dr. Nkrumah rejected the program after it was approved, and that is why his name is not mentioned in the literature. The reasons Ghana cited, you will find them manifesting in the 2022 term sheet also. Balloon public debt, revenue underperformance, high expenditure, depleted reserves, depreciation of the cedi, high inflation. You will find all of them there. In fact, you will find this across all the programs that Ghana has been or has had with the fund since just a second. Since 1966. The first major economic decision Ghana took after the overthrow of Dr. Kwame Nkrumah was to go to the IMF. And since then, it's been highly predictable. When we exited the 16th IMF program in 2019, which our chairperson referred to, there was something the IMF put in their exit statement. I call it their handing over note. They said they were ready to assist us anytime.
What did that tell you?
They knew we were going to come. And they were so certain that I believe the IMF bought their ticket in advance before we placed the call on 1st July 2002. The call was made on 1st July. The following Wednesday, the IMF was in the country. They knew. We had met the requirement. In fact, the signals were there in the last quarter of 2021 when Ghana tried to raise Eurobond from the market, talking to investors and all of that. So the understanding was that we're going to use the 2022 budget to make a strong statement in terms of assuring investors of a sustainable path to our debt sustainability, but that didn't happen. The current crisis, you will see it also across all the programs we've had, public debt. The debt-induced macroeconomic instability with fiscal policy to blame, you cannot outsource all of that to Russia, Ukraine. The factors that have taken us to the fund, you can group them under two, internal and external. So when the resilience of your economy is very weak and the external shocks come, it only magnifies the existing vulnerabilities and you become much more vulnerable than other countries. You can compare ourselves to Côte d'Ivoire. When our economy grew by 0.4% in 2020, Côte d'Ivoire did about 2%. When we celebrated single-digit inflation of 7.14% in 2021, Côte d'Ivoire was doing less than 1%. And you can check the extent to which their economy was much more resilient to COVID and Russia, Ukraine, as compared to Ghana. I think that we have to be honest with ourselves and speak truth to those, to duty bearers, so we can come out of this. And I'll tell you why.
Okay.
Côte d'Ivoire deserves to weep more than the bereaved. Because if you look at the countries that are more import dependent on Russia, Ukraine in terms of stable food, Ghana is not in the top 8. We are not. You will find Cote d'Ivoire, you will find Tanzania and the other countries. When it comes to wheat and the rest of them, you can see the specific interventions that Cote d'Ivoire put in place in 2021, 2022 in response to these external shocks. And you will see the long silence from Ghana, for which there's a direct pass-through of all the shocks to consumers' households. There's
Prof,
no cushion.
Let me just find this out briefly, because you've talked about the fact that since 1966, it's been the same. We've gone because of a rising public debt, a depreciation of the Ghana cedi, high inflation. Why do we keep facing these problems all the time? What is it that we are not doing right?
We, as a country, we do the talking, but we are not walking the talking. And we are not willing to pay the price that will bring development inclusively. We are not. Let me put it this way. Development is knowledge intensive. But we have the knowledge. To what extent do we put knowledge at the forefront of development in terms of evidence-based policy prescription and implementation? You will see a big divergence between the knowledge economy and then the political actors who drive development in this country. As though, to put it this way, winner takes all, and it's actually all. We have been talking about the Georgesburg economy that we have failed to transform since independence. More than 80% of our export earnings still driven by primary commodities. Then you can look at how we have structured our revenue generation activities. It's a big issue. Okay, our revenue performance is not the best relative to the size of our GDP. Of course, it's not every aspect of GDP that is taxable and its redistribution. But if you relate how much you generate to GDP, it gives you a fair idea. I'll give you just a few examples. We have just about 2.4 million people who are paying direct income taxes out of an estimation of 13.7 million labor force. Of course, some are unemployed, so. And then when it comes to the extractive sector, if you look at the fiscal regime, and I believe that we need to start that conversation now, and take another look at the kind of structure that we have put in place, because Ghana is not getting its fair share from the extractive sector in terms of the value added. Ghana's revenue from the extractive sector as a percentage of the extractive sector value added is just around 19%. The average for middle-income countries is around 54%. In fact, Nigeria and Botswana, we are told, are doing around 50%. If we were to collect enough revenue from the extractive sector, just as Nigeria is doing, studies have shown that Ghana will be able to collect, in addition, about $4.32 billion annually. That's more than $3 billion we are looking from the IMF spread over 3 years or so. Then you can also talk about corruption. Right. It's impossible to finish a conversation in this country without talking about corruption. It's been our big problem. Studies have shown that the country loses annually about $3 billion through corruption. So if you could allow all of this, then you should not be surprised if you have to go to the IMF as often as possible. Because countries that developed, they did so because they were intentional. And they did so because they ensured that the revenue generation handles are properly monitored, that the country gets or maximizes its tax potential or revenue from those tax handles. We are not doing that. In fact, ISODEC has estimated that through revenue leakages alone, Ghana loses annually about $2.2 billion. That said, you want to also look at the expenditure side. Our democracy is too expensive. I'm not advocating for, let's say, the alternative, right? But I believe that democracy is not one size fits all. So it's about time we look at how we are operationalizing our democracy. It's too expensive. The country can't afford that. And that
What's expensive about it? What makes it expensive?
You have to convince me why Ghana should have 275 MPs.
How many should we have?
We can have that conversation. Certainly, I'm convinced that it should be far less than that. We can't. Since 1992, if you look at the cost of operationalizing our democracy, it's so huge. And it leaves very little for growth-enhancing spending and for investment. We cannot tolerate that anymore. If you look at the size of government, the number of ministers and ministries, if you were running Ghana as a business, you would certainly have sacked some ministers by now, collapse some of the ministries, reduce government appointees, and the associated cost of running it. Doing so would not hurt growth.
Okay.
Doing so would only free up fiscal space for growth-enhancing spending.
Before I come to, Chonam here, I want us to do this because, so you've talked about the fact that if you look at the cost of our democracy, it's very expensive running 275 constituencies. You want to put a cost to it. You're talking about a reduction in the size of government. You want to tell us, the number, the percentage by which you would want it reduced so we can continue from there.
Yes, I think that Ghana should be able to do with less than 40 ministers. I'm looking forward to the president taking that decision in the 2023 budget. And then because we can document the cost savings from there and direct
40 ministers.
We can. Ghana's economy is not particularly unique. It's not. Côte d'Ivoire in April 2022 took a decision to reduce the number of ministers from 41 to 32.
Yes.
You have to convince me what numbers would do on the table. You know, we supported the president when in his first term, he said size matters with the number of ministers. But I believe that after 4 years, there should be a proper feedback. And the president would have realized by now that...
After 4 years, he reduced it to 86.
It's still, look, it's costly. If you look at the surrounding cost for one minister and the slave queen economy around all of that.
What is that?
Okay, I withdraw that.
Okay. Now that you've withdrawn it, we can continue. Yes.
When you have limited fiscal space, you want to look at areas where you can easily control costs or cut down on costs. That will not hurt growth. And doing this will not hurt growth. Here you have your debt to GDP ratio. Probably that will be more than 100% by the end of this year. The concern is not so much about the principal, but associated servicing cost. Okay. So debt servicing today is taking more than 60% of non-oil tax revenue. And we know what the debt sustainability would arrive at, that your debt level is unsustainable, and that requires some kind of debt restructuring. As far as we are concerned, haircut is unavoidable. The question is on whose head should it be? Right. Should it be on the head of government largely? And that is where we are talking about the government, the president taking the bold decision to downsize as a first step, and the signal effect to be real.
How about, the government saying we're cutting down on salaries. So we're told 30%. No. The president, when he spoke to the nation, says we'll continue with that and other political appointees. It doesn't help?
No, it doesn't help, because at the beginning of this year, in their enhanced domestic measures, they told us the market didn't react to it positively. Okay, and repeating that makes no difference, right? And to date, nobody has told us what the cost savings from those expenditure cuts have been and where they've been directed to and the effect and the rest of them, right? So I think that, let's be real, we are in crisis. In fact, if there's any word beyond crisis, that's what we should use. And you see, if you look at the data, the level of fiscal adjustment Ghana will have to make in the next 2 to 4 years to come out of this will be so steep.
What levels?
Okay, so if you look at the threshold in terms of 4 years, and you want to crawl back, because almost the country has been trending above the policy dependency thresholds across all the indicators of debt sustainability, either debt service to revenue ratio or present value of debt to export to GDP ratio and the rest of them. To crawl back to a more sustainable level, you are looking at recording a primary surplus of no less than 1.5% of GDP, and that is huge. So what that is telling you is that if you want to load all this restructuring on the fiscal side alone, the country cannot bear it. It may cause social unrest, because restoring macroeconomic stability in the immediate to the medium term, right, is costly. The fiscal adjustments that we have to go through in terms of expenditure restraint, revenue enhancement, it will be unbearable. And already we are talking about global shocks that did not exclude households and firms. People no longer have any buffer, right? So now if you want to go and buy cocoa, they will tell you that you want it with sugar. So if you want the cocoa with sugar, this is the price. Without sugar is this. Okay. It's always difficult when you are trying to use monetary policy to reduce inflation in an environment of weak fiscal regime and elevated public debt.
Okay. Thank you very, very much, Professor Godfrey Bopping. I'll get back to you. Thank you very, very much. And so before we get to you, Mr. Akpelu from the AGI, let's invite Dr. Valentine Mensah, who is a chartered accountant and a governance researcher, to join the panel. Let's welcome him with a round of applause. Shonam, so, having talked about everything, and the chairperson, I think, made the point that, yes, we have to also begin to look within. We have to look at producing the things that we love. Of course, you have to be incentivized and you would react towards it. But let's start with the solutions. What must we do? What are you prepared to do? What can you do to actually help within the current situation that we find ourselves?
Thank you, and good morning to everybody. And thank you, Professor, for the great historical perspective on all of this. So I would like to begin by answering your question from trying to understand the foundation of all of this and where we are. Even though I'm from industry, I would like to suggest that the foundation of the challenge is politics and how we do it here. So you realize that we've got a 4-year political cycle, and by the time you contest an election in Ghana, so let's say an MP or presidential candidate, to get to a level where you can win, let's say a presidential candidate, you will spend not less than $50 million to be able to win an election in Ghana. Generally, most of these politicians are not business people, and so I don't expect them that they've earned $50 million from their business. So obviously, that is money that has to be paid somehow. So you check into government, and you have a 4-year to be able to pay some of these debt. So the first overarching interest, in my view, of every politician is to be able to secure his personal and satisfying the interests that are more immediate than interests of the nation. So these are the realities. Having said that,
but how does he satisfy that interest?
You have to somehow find the money to be able to pay the money back.
How do you find that money somehow?
Well, your guess is as good as mine. I'm just saying.
Help me appreciate it. I want to quote you. Help me.
I know you want to do that.
Yes.
No, but on a serious note, the nation is so highly politicized, so much so that it's almost become a career and a business for people who are interested.
Are you suggesting that because of the need to find money, these politicians invest in cronies or invest in areas just to have the returns and not within the productive sectors of the economy?
Yeah, that perspective will certainly hold. But
that's your view.
So what I'm saying is that, so you have this cycle of politicking with a nation that is highly politicized. Even for us in industry, it's a daily struggle of having to try hard to depoliticize ourselves from the system of politicking. And so everything you're doing is viewed in all of these lenses, so much so that the real work, the real productive sector that will take us out of this challenge is secondary. It's not basic. So if we need to solve this issue, we need to deal with our politics. As to how we do it is difficult, to be honest, because we've already checked into the 4-year democracy cycle, and you already have a situation where it's so lucrative that you see young people from university without a lot of work background and so on are checking in, and everybody around sees the result of their checking in, and everybody seems attracted. There's nothing wrong to have career politicians. I mean, Biden is a career politician, and many others, but they have the system that works. Do we have the system? I'm not sure we have the system, because we need to build a system that revolves around production of developing a nation and all of that. So we don't have that system. Everybody comes, they firefight, as we know it here in Ghana, and then try to solve issues that are supposed to be dealt with a long-term nature, are solved with a short-term approach.
Okay.
So it's only natural that we'll come back again and discuss this.
One of the things that, I was reading an IMF document that said that, a World Bank article that said that, the good thing about what the developing world is facing today is that it would force them to look within. Now that their currency is depreciating, and because they are dependent on imports, they'll begin to look within. The question is, in looking within, how do we go about it?
So that's exactly the point I'm coming to. Mm-hmm. So for us in AGI, we've always known that this will get to IMF again, because we've been saying this every now and then. About 70% of everything we use in Ghana are imported. What we need now is to have a strong, productive economy that is highly industrialized, that allows citizens to participate in production where we consume what we produce. In fact, a lot of our folks are very entrepreneurial, a lot of our members. But the realities are that the entrepreneurial environment is so harsh that sometimes it becomes almost impossible to be able to produce. Number one, take the cost structure of production. Power constitutes about 30% of the entire cost of a manufacturing plant. Power averages around 16 cents per kilowatt hour in Ghana. And look at our neighboring countries. They are selling it, say, 8%, 10% per kilowatt hour. The issue is, how are we able to compete if you have such high cost of power, for example? Look at cost of credit. Today, if you are able to get a loan for 35% per annum, please show me where the place is. I will follow you so that tomorrow I can also get some. It's almost so expensive in this town to borrow. So much so that going to the bank is no longer attractive. But if you don't have the money to invest, how you expect it to grow? So you see most of our products are a little bit pricey. Most of the Ghanaian manufactured products are a little bit pricey. It's because of the situations we have to deal with, you see. And the taste of our people, we've all developed this, taste of consuming imported products. We all sit there and talk about it, but when you go home, we are all eating the perfumed rice. And that nationalistic, tendencies that were there in the 70s and so on are lost.
Okay. So you've talked about the problem. Now let's get to the solutions.
Exactly.
And when the chairperson was addressing us, she talked about how you would respond. The economic agents will respond to incentives, the policy would work. So let's look at what you are prepared to do and what you want policy to do for you. What is it that you want government to do for you by way of policy, and what you can do?
Okay, so for us, we want clarity in policy. I'll give you a classic example.
Please do.
If you are an investor in somewhere in Texas and your interest is to invest in rice in West Africa, you will not invest in rice production in Ghana. You go to Nigeria because the policy on rice production in Nigeria is very clear. You don't need a soothsayer to tell you. It's so clear. Local production of it and so on. I've known friends from Zimbabwe are relocating to Nigeria to embark on rice farming. But in Ghana, we try to encourage our rice farmers. But down the line, we are supporting the importation. Our wives are doing it, etc. We know them. So it's so confusing. What's the clarity of policy? What are you telling us? You're talking about poultry.
Mm-hmm.
Poultry depend heavily on the feeds. We have subsidized under the Planting for Food and Jobs, subsidized fertilizer for our farmers. Great, taxpayers' money, subsidized. Yet, you've got a system where people from the farm gates are taking the soya beans and the corn and exporting it. So our farmers, our poultry farmers, are unable to have access to the feed they need and have no option than to import feeds and have to look for dollars to be able to import. This problem can easily be solved by just making sure that the subsidized, things we produce here there's an arrangement to allow our poultry farmers to have it. So these are really practical, easy things to do. But because of vested interest, the guy picking it from the farm gate and exporting, that guy, what's his interest? Who is he? He's a powerful guy, probably even a decision maker, probably. So to deal with that, it's back again to the politics of things. Now for us, you're asking about what we can do. We can only do what we know best, to continue to produce and work hard to make sure that we create the environment and employ the more people, the more graduates that are unemployed. And most of these things, because we don't control it, we don't control policy, we don't control the cost of power and so on, we can only advocate that some of these things are improved. But I can assure you that most of my folks in AGI are so determined, are very passionate about Ghana, and we are doing everything we can to make sure that we expand the manufacturing base of the country.
Thank you very much. Let's give a round of applause. Dr. Mensah, the question is, what must we do differently? I mean, we've looked at why we have been going. We've talked about, having the same challenges over the years. We keep going back with the same problems. The AGI says, look, give us clarity in policy and get us the right policies, protectionism maybe, and we'll be able to produce. We'll be able to engage in import substitution. But for you, there's a fiscal component too. What must we do differently in ensuring that after this one, we don't go back again, and ensuring that the IMF doesn't leave a note if they give us a program that will be willing to assist us the next time?
Thank you very much. Good morning, distinguished ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to focus on the public financial management because I'm coming from the finance.
Sure.
And then, but I have to chip in an area that has not been covered so far. Because Prof talked about...
Please speak into the microphone for us.
Prof talked about politics. It's been repeated here. But then the biggest animal, culture, has not been talked about. If you look at Ghana, at the moment we've got the best financial management, public financial management law. But our culture is preventing us from benefiting from that law. If you look at every aspect of the implementation of the financial management rules in Ghana, you find problems. because even those who are supposed to enforce do not even understand. At the moment, I will tell you something that I'm working on with the reviewing the report of the Auditor General on the SOEs and public boards. Okay, the Auditor General came out with 17.4 billion irregularities. But then nobody stopped and said, does irregularities mean corruption? The whole nation concluded that the 17.4 million were financial losses that would have to be recovered so that we wouldn't have to go to the IMF. And that is a seriously mistaken position. See, the irregularities that the Auditor General reported on is just non-compliance. We have non-compliance. For example, the government borrowed or did not pay old SNIT 4.3 billion. The government owed Cocoa Board about 2 billion. Those two amounts are in the irregularities.
Okay.
So if you are looking at it as corruption, you are going to recover from the government and then give it back to the government. Does it make sense? So as a nation, our culture prevents us from questioning authorities. So we as a country, we just accepted the reports. And myself included, a friend and a brother, Edgar Redu, had to force me to analyze the report. And when I analyzed the report, there were so many misstatements and things that shouldn't be in the report as irregularities, or even if they were irregularities, they did not result in financial losses or corruption. But the whole nation has taken it as corruption. We've communicated to the investors outside the country. And are we destroying our country? Because if you look at the reports, I'll bet you that even 500 million cannot be related to corruption. So if you take the 17.4 billion, 97% is to do with the receivables and loans of the SOEs like Cocoa Board, SNATE, GNPC, then you go other like ECG. Those ones are operating commercially. They don't depend on the consolidated fund. So if you go and see that they have borrowed or they carry debt, even from the government or the other MDAs, you take that as irregularity and corruption. That is not their true position. So we have to come out of our culture. We have to find a way of managing our culture. We don't like change. At the moment, if you look at Ghana, our non-tax revenue is one of the lowest in Africa. 3.1%. In 2019, OECD reported 3.1%. The average of 30 African countries was 6.1%. So, but then if you look at investment in SOEs, Ghana may come as the first. But the SOEs, due to our culture, our first president invested so much in the SOEs. But instead of looking at meritocracy and looking at the best candidates to operate the SOEs, our culture forced us to look at the political loyalists. Whether they can run the SOE or not, that is how we started, and that is what we continue to do up to today. So you've invested so much. If you own the company and you invested so much, you will go for the best recruitment agency and find the best candidate to run your operations. But we have a culture of collectivism. You have to look at your cronies first, or your family, thinking that they will be the best to run the operation, but that doesn't work all the time. So we have this culture of power distance, which deals with respect for authority, collectivism, which deals with the in-groups, that we don't think outside our in-group. If you have the best candidate who is not a member of your party, a member of your family, you wouldn't even consider him. But with our investment in SOEs, we should be having around 10% of the non-tax revenue. And when we are talking all the time, we only look at taxes. And even if you look at other taxes that our colonial master has introduced, and we are still stuck with the colonial way of taxing, where we go for the easy, low-hanging fruits, registered companies, farmers exporting their cocoa. Those are easy. That's how the colonial government operated the country. But now, if you go to I was in the UK when I was studying accountancy. There was, we were parking our vehicles anywhere. And then they came up with an innovation of instant penalty fines. And that was, we have a police officer here. That was the Metropolitan Police that implemented that. Up to now, Ghana does not have that system. I was working in Congo, and one day I had to take a taxi from the Congo border to Rwanda. And the driver, considering that I may miss my flight to Ghana, oversped. The police officer stopped him. I thought that that was the end of my journey. Within 5 minutes, the police officer had issued an instant fine, and he took the license of the driver. And he said, when you get to your destination, go to any EcoBank, and then you pay. On your return back to the border, you give me the receipt, and then I give back your license. And that, I was surprised that for 65 years, we have not managed to introduce such a system. When you overspeed, the police officer would just engage you in what we call kangaroo tactics. They'll be walking around and talking, ignoring you, and you have to be forced to do what you do not want to do.
Okay.
If you were just giving the instant fine and say, you are going to Kumasi, when you get to Kumasi, pay. Then you come and get your license. About 80% of the population of the drivers in country will prefer that. Prof was talking about Côte d'Ivoire. What we refuse to do, due to our culture, another one called uncertainty avoidance, we don't want change. We think nyame betre and all that. We don't even look at what our neighbor is doing. We are talking about fuel prices and inflation. My conversation with somebody from Côte d'Ivoire, I realized that the diesel price is much lower than petrol. Then I asked the question, why? And because most of the transport operators use diesel. Most of the food that is catered to the capital, it's with trucks using diesel. So why can't we go to Côte d'Ivoire and, or even from our research, learn what you're doing and then do the same? In management, we have what we call benchmarking. And that's the best strategy a business should have.
Okay.
We should do the same.
Great. But you know, Doc, because you make the point, I mean, you've been talking about the Auditor General's report, the fact that we all will classify irregularities as losses and all of that.
Yes.
Yes, and whenever the Auditor General's report has come up, we've always tried as much as possible to clarify that irregularities does not necessarily mean that, you know, monies have been lost to corruption. That's something we do on the Super Morning Show. But let me just say that you're live on the Joy News channel and also live on the Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. So if you look at the Auditor General's report for 2021, which you've been making reference to, for instance, something just, you know, caught my attention, and I thought I should, you know, engage you on that briefly. So for instance, you're looking at some discrepancies in reported revenue figures. The Auditor General says GRA reports, for instance, direct and indirect tax, 57.4 billion. Controller and Accountant General's Department reports 60.6 billion. Now, when they contacted management, the management response is that the tax revenue figures reported in accounts were figures submitted to the Controller and Accountant General's Department by GRA and the MDA IGF revenues. But they say no. When we secularized our revenue collection as part of the process to confirm the occurrence and accuracy of the figures reported, the outcome informed our observation. This is a clear case of some 3 billion that says there's a discrepancy. Look at it. That is not all. It goes also to make a point about annual budget funding amount reported by the Ministry of Finance, 2.06 billion. Controller reports 3.3 billion. And he's asking the question, where is the remaining 1.3 billion? Can you look at it? Now, if the auditor says, look at it, and if the auditor in the management response, the auditor comes back to say, I have looked at it, and I insist that do this because your reasons are not tenable, or you've not offered, reasons that convince me, would I be wrong to say there could be something fishy here? Would I be wrong?
Yes.
Tell me.
Okay. I'll go back to and tell everybody what auditing means. The word auditing is to do with something. Here, you have to listen. You have to listen to the auditee. And that is why most of the appeal cases have been lost by the Auditor General. See, when you go and detect an irregularity, you may see it as an irregularity. For example, if you look at the detailed report of the Auditor General, you had Cocoa Board had to pay about 230 million to the Bank of Ghana because they borrowed and they had thought that it was, they had the moratorium, so it wasn't in their budget. But Bank of Ghana insisted and they paid the 230 million. But when you go, you see it in the irregularity. And the irregularity, if I owe someone and the person is insisting that I pay, and I pay, you say it's an irregularity because in the Public Financial Management Act, it says that if you haven't budgeted and you spend, there's a breach. So that is an irregularity. We wouldn't listen to the auditee, even though the Regulation 34 of the CI 70 of the Audit Service, they have stages of listening to the auditee, but it's not done. The research I've done proves that that is not done. I investigated an auditee. He said that when they come, they issue the queries in batches. And then when they pull out, then they apply their 30 days. If you do not respond within, they just issue the report and say that it's an irregularity. But that is not how auditing is done. We've moved away from the policeman position, and we have to engage the auditee and obtain all the necessary information. Even when it comes to post-balance sheet events, you have to keep talking to the client even before you sign the report, if there has been any change. Because, for example, SNIT, the 4.3 billion that was reported as irregularities, Ministry of Finance paid about over 2 billion, which was in the response, but it wasn't reflected. And then we come and say we've got corruption of 17 billion and communicate to the outside world. These SOEs, most of them are cash-strapped. Some are trying their best. And if we see a report like that, it's so demotivating. Okay. It's so demotivating. So it's the key is to listen to the auditee, go for more, if they will provide more information, then you change your position.
Exactly, and that's why you would see after the management letter, you bring your response, then they bring their response also. And if you look at the report, the audit service, the Auditor General tells you, after your response, we still insist some of these things should be done. You're right, and they talk also, you're right. But there's another point which you would agree as a chartered accountant, because Auditor General makes the point also that, and look at this carefully, in 2021, the MDAs paid, and some covered entities, let me put it away, covered entities, let me use the technicality, covered entities exceeded their compensation by 6 billion. We know the losses they made. Now the Auditor General says, you did not collect loans amounting to 15 billion. If you do not follow up and collect them, these become dormant receivables and you may lose these monies. Yes. That's something we all would agree. So, going forward, collect them. And also ensure that these entities become profitable so that they can survive, and two, check the payment. So you budget at the beginning of the year, you would budget, this is how much I intend to spend. Along the line, there might be COLA or something, one or two issues might come in. But 6 billion Ghana cedis more than the budgeted compensation would call for concern, and you must begin to even check the systems of compensation and how come you're seeing an increase of 6 billion in a financial year.
Okay, thank you very much. Okay, so let's take this year for example. I will use ECG because I've been working on the boards and SOEs report as an example. ECG exceeded its budget, and it could have been approved by the board. Okay, so the Auditor General went and saw that budget overrun, and they reported it as irregularity. But when you are operating a business, even the government had to yield to the demand of the union recently, because otherwise the whole country would have ground to stop.
Okay, I'm told we have to go to the participants here, but one issue that we need to get a clarification on. So I cited, for instance, the annual budget funding amount. Controller and Accountant General's Department identifies a discrepancy. Audit Service, Auditor General flags it and tells the Ministry of Finance to come again. Do you want to talk about that?
Yeah. Okay. So that we have errors that are unintentional. Okay. So and that is why the discussion is important. So if there's a discrepancy, you have to conduct further investigation, and that you may confirm whether it's deliberate or unintentional.
And if this is not the first time we've found such a discrepancy?
Yes, it's for example, since the GIFMIS was implemented, we have always had these problems. Some of the MDAs do not even enter their IGF, internally generated funds. But the Auditor General has been reporting on that. So it's good that these reports are issued, and they should be in the management letters. Because before, we have what we call reportable irregularity. And South Africa, I will refer to South Africa, they implemented their PFM Act in 2019. But they have two types of irregularities.
Dr. Mensah, you know what?
Yes.
You and I would continue our conversation later.
Yes.
We have to continue later because I have a lot of questions to ask. But unfortunately, I don't want to reduce this to the two of us. Yes. And so let's now give all participants here a chance. If there's any question you'd want to ask, please show by hand. We'll get a microphone to you. And then you'd be able to, ask the question. Yes. Just show by hand. Tell us your name and where you're coming from. Then you ask your question.
Thank you very much. My name is Eric Amponsa-Boateng. This goes to Professor Bobkin. We know that the tax to GDP in Ghana is 12%. Yes, but if you take sub-Saharan Africa, it is 22%. So based on what you just said, will the finance minister in the 2023 budget, will he be right in introducing new taxes? And then, but because in my opinion, I think that we may have to introduce new taxes, considering what we are going through now. You also mentioned that the revenue that we get from the extractive sector is about 19%. I want to ask you, what do you think we have to do right to make sure that we're able to increase it to at least the minimum 50 that you've mentioned when you are comparing Ghana with two other nations that you mentioned? Now, this one is my own recommendations. We are in a country where the SOEs, most of them, I won't say all, because I know that some of them are doing very well, but majority of them, they run at a huge loss. And that is why I agree with my friend, the
Dr.
accountant.
Mensah?
Yes. Why is it that government invests so much in setting up these institutions, and yet we give the management of those people to either their friends, relations, or loyal members? Now, with the tax, you look at even the VAT, it is not standardized, and that is why we have a big challenge. I remember a few weeks ago, the traders in Kumasi locked their shops. Okay, the issue is that why is it that some businessmen are not VAT registered? Why is it that others who are VAT registered are on the flat rate? Why is it that some of them are also on the standard rate? You see, so these are issues that we have to deal with. I have a lot, but let me just, because of time.
Okay.
We mentioned that we might likely go back to the IMF. Now, if I look at Prof, the figures that were given, based on how much we'll save if we are able to ensure that the loopholes in the revenue, the corruption is nipped in the bud, that is the amount that we will save will be more than the $3 billion that we are going for. So based on that, I remember I've always maintained that Ghana, we don't need to go to the IMF because we haven't yet been able to put our shoulders to the wheel and then exploited every situation to the maximum in Ghana. Finally, the one district, one factory. Yes, it is a very good thing. But my point is that if we were to implement it well, then, in my opinion, those who are producing pepper, tomatoes, cassava, and all that, we should be able to process them. Okay, so that these times when we have a glut, then we're able to save us a lot of money and not be importing pepper, tomatoes, and all that. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Professor Bobkin. Okay, let me just pick two more questions and then we come to the panelists. So they'll get the microphones to you and you tell us your name and the institution you're coming from. Then you can ask your question.
Yeah, my name is Apostle Benjamin Mensah. I'm an accountant and also an auditor, a senior auditor. But I think, like Professor said, we are in an intensive care. So I want us to zero in on what took us to the intensive care. Expenditure, bloated expenditure, and low revenue mobilization. So if our panelists can zero in on, that is why we are the IMF. Because our revenues are just not aiding our expenditure. Indiscipline, physical indiscipline. So let's, if you want to talk about certain exigencies it will take away from the moment we are in a crisis, and a crisis of indiscipline by the government. So let's zero in on over-bloated expenditure, all these ad hoc NABCOs, and they don't work. They have not worked. So we want long-term solutions to our problem. Look at something like taxation. I'm also vested in taxation. The average person who sells on the street must be told that you have to pay taxes. Now, I love the Ghana card because you can extrapolate PIN numbers, personal identification numbers from the Ghana card. So let me give an example. I sell pure water on the street. I know that the whole year government wants me to pay 600 cedis. By January 31st, I'll get the card on my neck or in my pocket. A GRA agent can stop me and scan it. Are you up to date? I can go to the Mokola, all the shops, the average shops you pay 200 cedis a month. You have to start from somewhere. Because everybody, government needs the revenue to spend. You go to the neighborhood shop, they are not paying taxes. You go there and say, look, your shop, I look at what you have. Okay, you give me 300 cedis every month. But I want you to pay it upfront because I don't want human meddling of it. It's cash. So there's a point of pay. You pay online, you get your receipt, then you get updated. We need to do something. 2.5% cannot be paying income taxes to aid these balloon budgets that we bloat out all the time. It's not possible.
Okay.
There must be a conscious effort that at the end of the year, I have to file my income taxes like we do in the US. The churches are involved. They will prep the minds of the people. Have you prepared your documents to file your taxes? You must. So civil society, the religious organization, we are all part of this solution process. So we should get on board and just zero in on these two things: expenditure and revenue mobilization. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I think I saw a hand at the back there.
Thank you very much. My name is Edmond Awaite. I own a book business. Prof, thank you for your consistent commitment and recommendation that you've been making with respect to this nation. I would like to know that when institutions are facing challenges, they sometimes organize what they call strategic sessions. Will you recommend a strategic session for the country? And who should be the component of those strategic sessions? And aside the various comments you've been making and the recommendations, I would like to know whether you've personally written something like recommendation to the government or those involved as a document so that it will be guiding them some of the decisions that we'll be making. These are my questions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Prof, a lot of questions to you, if you could address them.
Yeah. Okay, so I'll start from here. So our tax to GDP ratio is low, less than 13%. Considerably, one would logically suggest that introduce new taxes. I will say no. And my reason is that if you look at the country's tax potential, or what we call fiscal capacity, we could do between 24 to 25% of GDP. If you estimate that gap, which they will call your tax efforts, you want to explain where the causes are. The causes, you can narrow them down to two: gaps at the fiscal policy level, and then administrative and compliance. If you look at Ghana, the gaps exist less at the policy level. If the conclusion is that the gaps exist more at the policy level, then you can introduce additional taxes to close the gap. But if your analysis points to the fact that the gaps exist at the administrative and compliance level, new taxes is not the way to go. Enforcement. And if you look at Ghana, that is where we are. If you pick all the tax heads or the tax handles, you will see that they have not exhausted their potential. If you pick VAT, how much we could actually get from VAT and what we are getting right now, the gap is very wide. To close that, you don't introduce e-levy. To close that, you don't introduce additional tax handles. You want to look at the implementation arrangements surrounding VAT. Then you want to look at the exemptions we are operationalizing, which in itself affect VAT what? Compliance. That is how you do it. So the focus has to be on administrative and compliance in scaling up. So that is VAT. If you look at the effect of the exemption regime we are operating on VAT collection, is very real at the ports. Okay, and you can see politically connected businesses. Okay, all these things affect the state and our revenue collection. That is how you look at it. Then if you pick CIT, corporate income tax, again you see a gap. To close that, you don't introduce additional taxes. You don't introduce e-levy. It's more about enforcement and compliance. You have to do that. Then if you pick the direct income tax, I just told you just about 2.4 million people pay direct income taxes out of estimated 13.7 million labor force. Of course, some of them are unemployed, okay? So the way to close that is not through additional tax handles, but efficiency. And that is why I have held a view all this while that e-levy should be deleted. Right, it should be deleted. This is a fledgling area, right? The future is in the area of digitization. You don't introduce e-levy at this stage, right? So, and let's not look at tax only as an instrument of collecting maybe revenue for the state. Tax in itself can be conceptualized as an investment to grow a particular industry or an emerging area before you start deriving dividend from that. So if the government won't delete the e-levy, then it should be reduced considerably. We can have a compromise on that. Okay. Other than that, if you look at the countries that are accommodating a digital-based investment in Africa, Ghana is not in the top 4. Of course, size matters. You talk about Egypt, you talk about Nigeria, you talk about Kenya, South Africa. Right. So we want to create that enabling environment for the digital economy to grow before you start looking at dividend from that end. So I think, look, if you look at Ghana and you look at the layers of taxes, heavily indirect base, they all contribute directly to the high productive cost base of doing business in Ghana.
Thank you.
Okay, so if you put all of these things together within the context of the African continental free trade, we are actually undermining the competitiveness of our private sector to compete. Because this is a tournament being organized. We are only hosting the tournament in terms of the secretariat. It doesn't mean we'll win the cup. We must create that enabling environment for private sector businesses. You see, I'll give you one example. If you pick our VAT and you compare it to our peers, you may get the impression that our VAT is low, let's say at 12.5%. It's simply because the Get Fund component, the NHL, and the COVID levy, sanitation, we have now introduced them at straight what? With no option of recovery. All of this contribute to a high productive cost base of doing business. Now, pick an individual who is in the higher end tax category, pays, let's say, 30% or even 25%. If that person spends about 45% of that disposable income on household consumption and buys from certain areas, the VAT, together with other deductions alone, goes to more than 20%.
Okay.
If you add that to the 25% tax he had paid, that is almost 50%. If you look at the effective marginal tax of the ordinary Ghanaian, right, in that category, it's more than 60%. If you put that together with other expenditure items, it leaves very little space for savings in this country. And it's the reason why the average Ghanaian will struggle to save. If you operate that financially depressed environment, there is no way the middle income people, earners, and Ghanaians will be able to take advantage of the limited economic opportunity that is being created. And that is why practically every sector of this economy can only be taken by foreign what? Investors.
Great. Prof, let's get to the next question.
If they ask you today to put $50,000 on the table to take over a business, you may have to pray
I don't know.
Prof, let's get to the next question about expenditure. Yes.
Yes, I agree. Whilst we want to collect more revenue, we must also be looking at expenditure efficiency. I said something some time ago, and a lot of people, like, it didn't go down with people. I don't know whether I should say it again. I was saying that...
Say it again.
A sports child does not need more money. That child needs more discipline. They must go together. Ghana is a sports child. In terms of our lack of fiscal discipline, inefficiencies in our public investment management process, procurement infractions. This whole economy has been turned into a procurement economy, right? And the infractions in there and all of this. If you have such an environment, you will be very careful to say, keep on generating more revenue. So, like somebody will say, whilst you advise the cat, you must also advise the stinking fish. We must look at both. And that is why, even though we are uncomfortable saying we should go to the IMF, we found ourselves in a situation where we felt that going to the fund would be more helpful. Because going to the fund is not only the $3 billion spread over 3 years that you get, the fiscal discipline. Okay, because as a country, since independence, we have not been able to institutionalize that kind of fiscal discipline on our own. That internal fiscal restraint, we have not been able to do that. In fact, even when we did the Fiscal Responsibility Act in 2018 and capped the fiscal deficit at 5% of GDP, we actually didn't comply with it. Okay, to comply with that, what we did was to treat the financial sector cleanup costs and the energy sector cleanup costs as outliers, so we'll be able to comply with the 5%. But if you pull all of that together, we're doing more than 7% of GDP. Now, if you look at the fiscal deficit that Ghana has run in the last 30 years, it has averaged 6.5% of GDP. More than twice the 3% target set by the West African Monetary Zone. Right. Now, fiscal deficit in itself is not harmful. The source, the financing are the issues you want to consider. And then you see how fiscal populism, or what they call political business cycle, that emanates every election year. That has been a problem.
Okay.
So election-related fiscal slippages actually do not go to the productive sectors of the economy. When we are done, the inflationary pressures from there can no longer be unexpected. And you see it. And that is why when Ghana was blaming COVID in 2020 more than any other country, we felt that that was being less charitable with the truth. Because 2020 was an election year. So if you look at the fiscal deficit across Sub-Saharan Africa in 2020, even Cote d'Ivoire, they did less than 6%. Ghana did more than 15% of GDP. And you can see the election effect, spending to win over electorates, right? Okay. And all of that. And then the quasi-fiscal interventions from state-owned enterprises, all of that geared towards winning over election is costly. We can't tolerate that. So we are looking at fiscal discipline, we are looking at maybe efficiency in our public investment management process, reduce the size of government, restructure the state-owned enterprises. Look, let me tell you something. Briefly. In the last 6 years, if you look at the staff growth in the number of some of the state-owned enterprises, is huge. What is the productivity from there? And then we are creating different layers. Are you aware? Even in some places, the board chair has an office. Okay. If you continue like this, you have to be unique to expect a different outcome and think that you can just continue like this and development will just drop from heaven. If you look at our poster right now, you get the impression that we think that some way, somehow, a certain economy will drop from heaven and replace what we are going through right now. Even to the extent that we are unwilling to admit the reality that our debt is unsustainable. And the fundamental issue is that the financial system is the ultimate residual risk claimant of public debt overhang. And that is why the suspicion is ripe that there will be some kind of haircut and all of that, and government is not forthright in terms of what has to be done.
Thank you, Professor Bob Quick. We need to hear from Dr. Otinkuma. He just wants. I just want his views on what we must do differently. So let's get a microphone to him. Please, who has the microphone? Dr. Otinkuma, who's been, IMF representative in Djibouti, and we've been having these conversations, lots of conversations. Yes, Dr. Otinkuma, briefly from you, what do you think we should do differently?
Well, thanks to all of you, the panelists, and I think Prof's diagnosis spot on. I think that clearly what I would characterize our current situation is that we are an economy who is living beyond its means. That's what we need to acknowledge, that we are living beyond our means, and that means a couple of things. One, we have to go back to basics. How do we come back and live within our means? And that's why this talk of the IMF, although new, as some of you have said, is not new. What will it do? It will allow us two things. One, and I think Prof has talked about it, it'll allow us credibility, but it will also allow us the discipline which, unfortunately, we have not been able to impose on ourselves. Now, I need to be quite frank with you because we may be disappointed. Because although they may be looking at the country, Ghana, the prescriptions might turn out to be the same as we've done 17 times. It's the same fiscal, the same monetary, the same exchange rate, and the same structural policies. Why? Because it's an economy which is living beyond the means. You have to try and get back the liquidity that will allow you to go back. So we've talked about deficits, we've talked about high interest rates, we've talked about monetary overhang, and so on and so on. There's nothing new in all this. So that's why I'm saying that you're going to be shocked by what happens. That we're all Ghanaians, everybody's waiting for manna to fall in heaven. All that's going to happen is that we're going to have to tighten our belt. Now, how do we do things differently? I think that for me, from my experience, the way we have to go about it is two things. Because we have had so many programs, and yet when we are having a program, we behave. When we go outside the program, what do? We misbehave. So clearly there is something that we need to institutionalize. I don't know where you put this organization. Maybe extra presidential. That says after a program, although the Ghanaians, they will have the authority to look at the fiscal program and ensure that all the targets are met. That to me is our major problem. Most Ghanaians will say, well, we cannot have a body that's non-elected supervising our things. Well, I'm afraid the 17 times experience suggests that we need to think very seriously about that. The second thing has to do with this whole domestic liquidity. Everybody's been talking about the exchange rate. I think it's an important conversation that I think we need to have now. And I've been discussing this with some of my colleagues. Why is the exchange rate moving the way it's moving? It's because, as Professor said, the underlying fiscal deficit and so on creates a momentum where we borrow, either domestically or abroad, and then that creates this liquidity problem. And over time, we import a lot, and therefore this has effect on the exchange rate. The question that we have to ask ourselves is there a mechanism in the governing system, for example, of the monetary authorities that will allow us to try and control the depreciation? I think we have to have the conversation now. Some people are talking about pegging. But as far as I'm aware, one of the things what we need to consider very seriously is trying to back the issue of currency with foreign exchange. You know, there are several aspects of it. You can have 50%, you can have 20%, but the whole idea of taking this responsibility of willy-nilly creating and printing money has to be looked at very seriously.
Okay.
Because I think countries that have done that have subjected the creation of money and so on to a system that ensures that the production of money is only consistent with real productive economic activity has to be considered. I only say that because of our experience, because we've shown that we're incapable of doing that. And so I'll stop there with these comments. Thanks.
Thank you very, very much. Doctor, Emmanuel Otinkuma. Let's hear from Dr. Sam Ankra, who's a development economist. He will just say a few things just in a minute, and then we'll invite the chairperson to give her closing remarks.
Thank you very much. I think the panel has digressed into the problems that we're facing as a nation. But one thing that we've all forgotten about is we talked about having been a resourced nation. We have a lot of minerals. How has that benefited this country? The oil, the gold, the diamond, all these minerals that supposedly Ghana owns or have. How has this impacted the economy? I think it's a very critical area that we have to look at. We've overlooked it several times, and I think it's about time we start addressing. Years ago, just after the Second World War, Norway was a very, very poor country. They were just fishermen and farmers, nothing to show for as a country, until they found oil. Today, Norway is one of the world's richest countries. How did they get there? These are things that I expect economists and leaders of these countries to look into, because we can't just profess that we have gold, we have diamond, we have this, we have that. How has that impacted this economy? Go to Obuasi and see how the city is messed up. What do we see in Accra? So I think in as much as we're talking about all these fiscal policies, monetary policies, and leadership and so forth, the critical area, the elephant in the room, is being dodged, and we need to address that going forward. Thank you very much.
Look, it's been a very great conversation. As always, time, once you're enjoying the conversation, time would also not be your friend. And let me just say that we'll continue the conversation on the Super Morning Show on Joy 99.7 FM. Thanks to the panelists. A big thank you to you, Professor Godfrey Bokping. Thank you, Chona Makwelu of the Association of Ghana Industry, Greater Accra Chairman, and Dr. Valentine Mensah for joining us. Let's give all of them a round of applause. We now would invite the chairperson, Dr. Priscilla Bafo-Chumisi, to give us her closing remarks. Let's welcome her with a round of applause.
Thank you very much. I believe you agree with me that our team of panelists have done a great job. Please, let's give them a round of applause once again. So in going through the discussions and trying to see which ones I need to summarize for us to take away, there is a lot that has been on the table, and I believe that as we deliberate on the issues, the key conclusions are that Ghana needs to do something about revenue mobilization. It is evident that since independence, we have not. And it's basically because of the way the economy is organized. 80% informal sector. And with our latest innovation of trying to use the digital media to try and bring in supposedly the informal sector, it has been a big fail. So probably we need to look at issues of e-levy, for instance. The proposal by Professor Bopkin is to take it out. As an economist, I would say that once it's on the table, probably we'll keep it and tweak it and make it more workable. So, for example, is it possible to bring down the rate significantly? Is it possible to take out mobile money transactions, for example, person-to-person transactions, and focus on transactions, e-sales, e-commerce. Those are issues that we can look at. In terms of the factors that keep taking us to the IMF, when you look at the preceding 16 times, the factors are the same. You look at the cyclical issues of high inflation, ballooning public debt, depreciation of the currency, then we go to the IMF. And like Dr. Kuma said, it all boils down to the fact that once we exit a program, the indiscipline comes in. So how are we learning as a people? We need to learn to cut down costs. Corruption is an issue that keeps coming up. And then the cyclical cost of our election is also something that is quite telling in the data, because when you look at our election cycles, you see that it is really a very expensive adventure or a very expensive path that the country is on. So in wrapping up, expenditure restraints, revenue mobilization is key. What do we need to do in terms of mobilizing our efforts with domestic production? Yes, like AGI rep indicated, Choma, the point is that the cost of production is too high, and the reality is that Ghanaian manufacturing firms are not competitive. Cost of power, cost of credit, even skilled labor, most of them complain about it. We need to get to work at these issues. There is also the issue of policy uncertainty, and when you are trying to create incentives, the policies ought to be certain about it. In cutting down expenditure, SOE is consistently coming, but as we go on the program, hopefully, in this budget, we hope that, it is our hope that we don't expect the introduction of new taxes. Existing tax handles must be used to work, but the issue of property taxes is something that we also need to take a critical look at as a country, because we know that a few of us are fabulously rich and they can chip in more than those at the bottom. How do we insulate the poor, particularly as we brace ourselves towards a program which we know would be emphasizing on austerity measures, expenditure cuts? In periods like this, with rising fuel prices and all, we know cost of transportation is biting. It feeds into the inflation. Is it possible state-owned enterprises like the Metro Mass Transit, how do they come in to support the poor in terms of reduction in cost of transportation? Some years back, we had instances where children, school-going children would board the buses. Now you don't see these are...
Well, Dr. Priscilla Chumesi-Ba for delivering those final comments at the Graphic Stanbic Bank breakfast meeting, the last of the quarter. And of course, they are talking about 17 times at the IMF and why we should not end up there again. It's been a privilege coming your way on the AM show. Do stay. We have a lot more coming your way on this channel. Join us. My name is Benjamin Akafu. Have a wonderful day.